Hello, welcome back to my Alteryx videos. Today's video is to a degree simple, but I want to try to bring across a couple of different points. While its official title is Multi-Field Data Cleansing, the subtitle actually makes a little bit more sense, which is Tricks, how to make Alteryx work for you. Having been in the development world for a very long time, one of the adages we had is that the smart developer is the one that tries to write as little code as necessary, letting the tools do the work for them. And so many of you that are not from an enriched development background, coming from the business side, tend to see all the work that has to be done and try to brute force your way into it, and not realizing that there are some tricks that you can use, especially in Alteryx, that'll make your development work a little bit easier. And so I'm just going to throw some of those into this simple solution to a problem of cleansing multiple fields within a data stream, just to highlight how this all can come about. Also point out some gotchas that you might run into along the way, as well as alternatives of what you're trying to do. So if we want to look at where we are headed with this, is quite simply using one of my other videos, which was dealing with a macro that will go ahead and cleanse our string data that's coming in a messy numeric format. I've updated this recently to be a little bit more generic, to look at a problem that I was experiencing with a piece of data. But basically what we want to do is take these interestingly different but still accurate from a interface standpoint for numbers, and go ahead and correct them and make them into, rather than a strange string field, into an actual number that Alteryx can process. As you may have seen in my past video, as I mentioned, I do have this macro out here. I updated it a little bit, so it's a pretty simple macro. It goes ahead and brings in your data stream and performs a little cleanup. I updated this a little bit to do some additional work, which is to use the regex replace and to go ahead and clean some of this up. But at the end of the day, what it does is it cleans that through. And to use that within a data flow is quite simple. We right click on here, say insert. Down here at the very bottom is macro. I have it already opened up here, so it brings it in. I just need to go ahead and identify in my data what I want to convert. Drop a quick browse on the end of this. Give myself a little bit of room because I am going to grow this. So you can see what it did is it went ahead and converted these strings into good numbers. And then if I want to do that for all these fields, all that I really have to do is repeat this process and drop another one in line here. And we will go ahead and convert the second column. Give it a run. You can see that in the output side, that second column has become a nice looking number as well. And repeat this for all 13 columns that are in here, because this is a rolling 12 months worth of data that's being sent to us, with the current month being given first. In this case, it was November. And so we put the rolling going from there forward. But this becomes very tedious. You have many fields you have to connect up. You might have a very wide data set, and just plugging all these in gets to be a bit tedious and repetitive. Also, what happens if you have something that's a bit more dynamic, you have to rewrite this workflow every time your data changes. For example, this data will change next month, and so therefore I have to go ahead and replug everything all at one time back into it, and we go on from there. So what can we do to make this easier for us? Well, we're going to do a couple of things, and the very first thing we want to do is show how Alteryx works great on individual fields. It doesn't work quite so great on multiple fields. It becomes a bit recursive. We do have inside of the preparation, we have the multi-field formula, so that we can go ahead and drag this multi-field formula into it. and then put that function in there, but we can't call the macro inside of the multi-field formula, so that sort of undoes the purpose of having the macro. So what we want to look at first in our trips is what I call splitting and recombining the data stream. Knowing that Alteryx can do some work for me, basically in the transform, it can take these multiple columns and transpose them into rows of data. And that way then the multiple fields become one field. I can act on the one field and life will be simple. And then what I want to do is put it back together again. So the trick of separating it and putting it back together is to make sure you have a primary key. And in my case, what I like to do is go ahead and sign my own primary key or identifying record. So I just put a record ID at the beginning of this. And then I can go ahead and transpose this. Dropping that in, the key column is record ID. And then all these become data columns after that. If you notice that when this runs, this again allows you to be Alteryx dynamic, because if it has additional fields, it'll go ahead and process those as well. Makes this for application purposes. So now when we run this, what we get is we get a record ID. We have each of the columns as a name and then the values associated with. So it makes it pretty easy to go ahead and run our macro against just this one column. But hold on a minute. There is a minor problem with this as well. And that is that we don't want to convert these non-numeric values, such as the item name and the source, which is Bob. So what we want to do is be able to separate this data out into two flows, one flow that needs to be converted and one flow that does not need to be converted, and then put it back together again. And now there's a couple of ways of doing that as well. One of the ones that you might want to try doing is within the join. You have the find replace, so you can sort of use that to match up the months to some of the rows, and then separate it by whether or not they actually match. That tends to be a multiple step process, and so I decided to be a bit fancy and just use a filter and use a regular expression inside of my filter. So we look at how regular expressions can help you. But keep in mind, regular expressions, there's a number of functions. There's a number also of there's regular expression widget up here as well. Each of these works a little bit differently, and it's good to remember how they work. And so I would like to use regular expressions when I can, just to continue to keep my skills up to where I need them to be, so that when I have to drop into it, it's not such a steep learning curve. So what I want to use is the REGEX Match inside of a filter. But to make sure that works, what I would do first is go ahead and want to use it in a formula. Doing that means that I can test out to see how it works without having to continue to split and see where it's falling apart. So we're going to add a column. It's going to be a Boolean because it's a true false. We're going to call this test. Make it a Boolean. So what we want to put in here is the REGEX Match function. It takes as the input a string. In this case, we want to use the value. And now we must give it a pattern. This is where the fun of REGEX comes into. I will make this bigger so you can see it, and it's a good reminder of how this all works. What I want to do is find every line that begins with one of the months. And so to do that, I use the anchor for beginning of the month, or beginning of the string. So this says the string begins with, and then I want to put inside of parentheses, put the quote there so I remember it, is we want to put the list of values that we want to use to test this with originally. I'm just going to make it simple with January and February. So this says that if the beginning of the string is January, February, it is true. But we must also account for all the addition ones, because the REGEX match will look for the entire string to match what the example is that you gave it. So we need a dot star that says that it's the beginning, and then there can be multiple characters afterwards. The caret for beginning of line, period star. For any number of characters after, it finds either January or February. We can go ahead and run this. We can look into our results over here from the regex expression, and we can see that, oops, we didn't want value, we wanted name. Wonderful how that all works. Live testing is always lots of fun. Let's go ahead and put name in there again, run it one more time. And now we can see that it matches down here January and February. So now we know if we put all the months out there, it will work. To do that, I am going to play a little game of cut and paste, and I will simply paste in the rest of the months from an editor that I have over here, which is how I actually developed it. Why do you want to type it all in here? Because it's not quite so friendly. So we want to paste in the rest of the months, which is now all the months. We can run that. And you can see that it's true for all of the months that are down here, regardless of what year they are in. So I know that will be a good function call to get the Boolean true or false put in my filter. I also don't want to forget this in the future, because this is, again, a bit tedious to build the first time. If you don't remember, you have a couple other icons over here in your formula. If you haven't noticed them, we have the save one down here. So I can actually save this expression. We want to call this REGEX Match months. So that sometime in the future, when I want to remember how I did this, I don't have to look for the workflow. I can simply go into the open, and down here in saved expressions, there's my REGEX Match months, as well as ones that I've been using recently. And you can see how much fun I had making this work by going through a bunch of different test iterations. But got it working after I remembered how it all works. So what I can do now is come back in here. I want to copy this out because I want to stick that into my filter. Delete that off. We don't need it anymore. Let's go ahead and drop our filter in. I simply want to use a custom filter over here. I will paste in that regex. What that means is the true sides will be the columns that I want to run through my macro. The false sides will be the ones that I don't. So doing that, I simply do a insert again. Macro, there's my convert string to number. Drop it in up here on the true side. Select the field, which is value. I can now run this. So up here on the true side, you can see that it's properly converted all of the strings into good, well-formatted numeric strings. On the false side, I have these records that I didn't want. So now what I need to do is put all this back together again. So obviously the way to put two streams together is through the union. There's one and there's two. The nice thing about it is that the union will go ahead and maintain the order by which it will see these. And since we want to make sure that when we recombine these, the recombination will also keep order, we want to go ahead and set a specific order, which is that we want column or stream 2 to come first, so it comes out before the data in stream 1. You would actually do this in processing because it's much faster to simply feed this into the union than it is to convert it and then feed it into union, but we don't want to take that chance. So we're going ahead and saying stream 2 first, stream 1 is second. That way it'll sort of keep the order of our columns for us. Because now we're going to put the streams back together again, because we have two streams, they have an ID in common, and then they have columns. So we do that with the cross tab. That takes our rows and turns them back into columns. Our unique ID happens to be record ID. The header is name, and the value is value. This is actually an aggregate function, so just in case there are multiple records for the recombination, we don't have that, but we need to take care of it anyway, so I just use first to make that happy. I run this, take a look at the output, and you can see my data is back the way it started with converted data in there. So rather than me trying to figure out how to do temporary files, any kind of read and write process and programming, I let Alteryx split it out, filter it out, convert it, put it back together again. The last thing I want to do is go ahead and turn those into numeric data types. There's a number of ways that we can do this. In the near future, I'll talk about how to use a file type file, but in this case, we're just going to go ahead and use the auto field because it's close enough to matching what we need it to do. We want to go ahead and not use, well, I can just do auto field for everything. Run this. So coming out of the auto field, if we look at the output, click on metadata, we can see that we've become numerics, strings and integers. Works out the way we want it to. It makes a good source of data we want to go. We want to get rid of that record ID because that's not part of the original data stream and we don't need it anymore. So we simply turn record ID off. And to round this out, drop a browse on the end so we can look at the solution of the data. Leave it here so we can see it on the same screen. We can now run it. And you can see that our data has now been cleansed up so that all the unusual formats of numbers have become standard and it becomes a standard type. Our data is in the same order that we started with. It also works well that because of Alteryx's ability to read through unknown fields, this would also allow us to convert through an application any data file that came in as it came in month over month, or the fact that all I need to do is to click on this data set and plug it into the input file, and all the rest of it would stay the same. Obviously, when we do this for real, we no longer need this piece up here, so we can leave that off, but I left it there just so we can see the other process that you might want to do. And again, there are other widgets that I could have used, but I just saw this as a fun solution, as well as getting Alteryx to do the work, both within the filter and within the splitting and recombining the data at the end. So don't be afraid to reach out. Comment on this if you have some questions of your own. You'd like to learn some additional tricks, subscribe so I know that you're interested in these, and let me know how your work is going. Hope you enjoy this video. Have a great day.